I get the exciting spot of wrapping up, and we have a while put aside to talking about the 1.2 release and roadmap going forward. Obviously, we've talked a lot about what the toolkit has to offer, what's recently been added, and what you can do with it, but perhaps we're a little bit unspecific as to when exactly some of those things got added or which release you would need to be using. So let's kick off with really defining the 1.2 release, which has been the focus of most of this presentation for the mobile, the added functionality, widget extension, and as Stephen pointed out in the last presentation, probably underpinning the next version of the desktop project as well. So the 1.2 release is not out now. We haven't been able to pull it together to share with you today, but it is imminent. The expectation is that we'll have it published in your hand by Monday. We're pulling together the last little bit of functionality, bug fixing, and thought it would be really great if a few people out there would be able to test it in advance of the public release. So everything that you've seen is actually available though on the develop branch. All of this functionality has been pushed to the main area where we do all of our work, and given that this is an open source project, you're freely able to check out all of that code that isn't actually yet released. The release that we're going to roll in the next couple of days is going to be a preview release. This will allow us to put all of this functionality out for early adopter testing. We'll put a version number against it so that anybody who is using Go modules, for example, will be able to get this functionality easily. And anybody who is on an older version of Go will put instructions about how you can test it as well ahead of the public release. We want lots of people working with this project and testing the latest functionality. The 1.0 release that we had, we got great feedback, and it was really beneficial to get lots of different points of view to roll a fantastic release, and we want to do that again with 1.2, addressing mobile devices with the same code you're using on the desktop is a big conceptual challenge, and we expect all sorts of feedback. We would love to wrap that into the release and to be able to make it something that everybody understands and is excited about. And obviously testing is all important for us. We've got lots of automated testing, validating the features that we've built, but it's extra people testing it from their point of view that is really going to make a big difference for us. So what remains for us to be able to get the 1.2 release? Well, the iOS and Android support is not yet complete. We're absolutely welcoming any contributions who would like to help us get there, but there's not a huge number of big ticket tasks left yet in the milestone. There is currently no virtual keyboard support for the applications that you build to mobile devices, so it's great for games, it's great for data presentation, anything where you'd be using the screen to interact but you don't need to bring up a keyboard. So the entry widgets currently won't show that system keyboard that you'd be used to seeing to get input. That is our very next item to get included, but I don't think it will meet the Monday pre-release. We don't yet have clipboard integration. Now, we're putting it up here as it's something that we know we don't do. It's very important to us that all of the functionality in the Fyne toolkit works across all of the devices that we support. However, I think if large mobile smartphone device manufacturers can ship for a year without clipboard, then maybe that might get permission to be deprioritized if we would like to get the release out sooner. We're really open to the feedback that we get from the community. And I mentioned earlier today that the desktop rendering has had some significant performance improvements, and that's really made a big difference for how great the applications feel to the end user. We want to make sure that the much younger code on our mobile platform gets the same level of care and attention. There are additional bugs that we would like to squash as part of this release. Window handling and the details about what happens when old windows are closed, which do they switch between, applications with multiple windows, clearly got a bit more complicated when we added a target device that really expects only one window to be open at a time. So we're keen that we smooth all of the areas of that so that things go exactly as expected. And again, I'll say we need a lot more testing in this area. The applications that we've shown you today work just great. The demos will compile and run on the mobile devices and can be deployed to your own hardware. All of these things are fantastic, but we wrote these applications ourselves. We know how we expect them to work, and so it is so important that the community, other people who are working with these tools, try it out, give us their feedback, and let us know what we could do to improve it. With all that in mind, like I said, some of these tickets are not part of a long list. It shouldn't really be a huge amount to get this over the line, and we would really be excited to have this in your hands in 2 weeks' time. So we're currently aiming to have all of this released on the 6th of December. We'll need your help, and we definitely would love any support or advice or feedback that will help us get there. This is the aim, and I'm really hoping that we can pull this together between the team and the community to make it happen. Either way, I'm looking forward to playing around building new applications across all my devices over Christmas with the 1.2 release out there and my code deploying to all the devices I can find. So that's where we are with 1.2. I hope that everything that you've seen has been interesting. If you're able to try out the development code, you could do so right now. If you're waiting for the pre-release, it's just a couple of days before that will be in your hands, and we will be pulling all of this together to get a release out in a couple of weeks. Of course, once 1.2 is out, the story certainly doesn't slow down. In fact, it probably just gets more exciting from there. We've put together a lot of infrastructure to be able to build better and applications faster across more devices. So where could we go from here? So let's just have a look at the roadmap after the 1.2 release. We are expecting to pull one more release on the version 1 numbering. This is some pretty cool functionality that we think will finish rounding out the true capabilities of a graphical toolkit such as this. The full two-way data binding is something that is very exciting if you've come from a web background. To have your applications connected to data and to automatically update is something that's become pretty much standard, and other toolkits are managing to see this functionality being brought in. We have an opportunity here with the new tooling. Go as a language is going to make this great. This is something that we can really use to make application development so much easier for anybody who's managing data or keeping state in a way that's not tied to the presentation specifically. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. we are going to add a list and table widget at least, which showcase this new functionality. Incredibly, the list widget is joining us a little bit far down the road. It's been requested many times through our bug tracker, but we haven't had the functionality to do it correctly. We didn't think that building it without the data support would produce a really great user experience. There was a chance that application developers would have to do too much work on their end. So we have decided that it's going to be time to add it once 1.3 is underway. It's also well beyond the time where people would like dialogues, especially file, open and save dialogues to be included in their applications. Currently, you open a file in your application by passing it as a command line argument, which is not really ideal for everybody and introduces some challenges when you're working from application launchers and so forth. And lastly, for 1.3, we're really looking to improve our text formatting as well. The layouts, the widgets for labels and entry work very well, but they are of limited functionality if you want to present or work with formatted text. So we're going to scope that into 1.3 and provide Markdown support built in as well. So that will be to provide formatted text inline in your application. We'll be using the Markdown format as opposed to embedded HTML, which is a route that many people have taken before, but we think that Markdown is the way to go, and we'll have the functionality built into the system to support it as part of the 1.3 release. Now, with all of these, there's a lot of work involved, and with large pieces of work requires a lot of planning. In fact, for those who have been paying attention through the project's history, you might have noticed that we were initially hoping to have data binding in version 1.2. However, as we built out mobile and also the new API for widget extension and custom widgets, we realized that was a little bit too much all in one release. And so we've put the data binding back to its own release along with these other features you see here. However, because the work's been ongoing, we do already have working prototypes that show how that can work. So once again, I would like to hand over to Steve and his presentation from a couple of weeks ago at GopherCon Australia. Thanks again for permission to share these videos. And over to Steve to share where we are with data binding.
Two-way data binding in Fyne, how do we do it? There's a data API that's being developed at the moment that we're hoping to release by Christmas. It's basically a set of interfaces defined inside Fyne, where if your data can implement these interfaces, then you get automatic two-way data binding. And I'm using that in a game I'm writing where RPCs are coming in with protobuf information, and I don't want to manipulate them, I just want the data to come in and automatically update all the maps and all the explosions and everything else happening in the game. Very quickly, data item is just any data structure that has a stringer interface and that you can attach listeners to. So every time the underlying data changes, the listeners are automatically fired. A data map, same thing, but where the map itself is modified, new entries added or removed, then the listeners get fired against that. And finally, a data source, which on the surface looks like a slice of data items, but it supports lazy loading, pagination, and just makes it fairly easy. I think it's modelled on the iOS data source. The naming is quite similar. So how does that affect your code? How do we go and implement this inside a program you may have written? Well, initially we've got a number of constructors for all the basic widgets. So if you want to create a label, it's just widget.newLabel, give it a string, new entry, and then you can have callbacks on there to read and write the values. new checkbox with a callback function, all very straightforward. So to take those existing function signatures and make them work with two-way data binding, we just have a variant that we'll be adding that says new entry with data, give it a reference to a data item, and then all of the publish and subscribe, updates, everything else is all happened automatically within the toolkit. Which again, if you've used something like Angular lately, there's a lot of code there that's achieving all that, and there's a lot of weird nomenclature that you have to go through to interface with that. Not with Fyne though, because Go. So let's have a demo of this one. Oh, it's pretty insistent, this, isn't it? It really wants me to come up with. Okay, so here we have an application with a window and a number of data items attached to that. I've just created one of each type here. So there's a data item of type clock, which is just a string that changes itself once a second. Some Boolean data, some numeric data, string data, floating data, blah, blah, blah. So this application here has one window with a view against that. We'll fire up another one here. This is a different view of the same data. So as I change this one here, you'll see on the right-hand side there that some of those, the size in fact is changing each time I change that. This one here, delivery time, you can see the value changing in the larger window on the right as I move that around. So this is just basically a set of widgets that are bound to that same data. And we can sort of prove that by firing up another one and another one. And you'll see that as I change data here, all the global data is all changing in real time and updating all the subscribed widgets attached to that. Nice. Now there's another button. What does this do? Okay. Who put that there? So here's our fractal. If we recall, this one uses a procedural function that, given an x and y coordinate, will return a colour. So all I've done here is take a clone of that and change the algorithm so that it is influenced by the global data from the data store. That's a mouthful as well, but you can see it work here. If I go to this one and change the delivery time, that's going to change the scaling of that fractal in the blue window. So what's happening there is, as this slider is changing, it is publishing a change to the global data, and then all the other windows are receiving a subscription event. And we can have another one. Got to sync that one. So there we go, everything's all changing all at the same time. And I can go to the fractal, I'll just set focus to that and use those keys we used before to change the scaling. That will change it within this fractal and then tell all the other widgets that the underlying data has changed. Nice. One more button. Of course, the game of life. This is a very strange implementation of life in that I've included a number of effects that are going to be affected by these shared data widgets here. So if I change the delivery time, it's affecting the hue. Let's just make that a bit bigger. There we go. So I can change the colour, and it also changes the animation speed. So that's going to go full speed if I go up to there. And put it down the middle. That'll invert the display, and again, using some third-party libraries to, if you recall with this one, it returns a Go image, so I can implement other third-party libraries there to apply filters to that. So let's say go there, it does an outline effect, invert effect, speed it up, done.
Oh, wow. Thanks so much, Steve. That's a really helpful insight into how data binding could work and probably will work for the 1.3 release. hopefully folk can see the power that that builds into applications where the data is not directly connected to the widgets and the graphical presentation that you're working with. So that's 1.3, what we plan to be out at some point next year as the last one of the release chain. Version 2, goodness, it scares me a little bit just saying that out loud, but we are already thinking about where we could go after that. And animations and multimedia seem to be the focus of what we should be adding at that point. Believe it or not, with so many great demos that we've seen today, there really isn't much animation built into the Fyne toolkit at the moment, and any transitions that you've seen have been coded within the application. It might not be a lot of code, but we do want it to be more seamless, to be a completely straightforward experience for any developer who's building an application to get smooth animations and transitions just by describing the widget that they want, the type of animation that they wish to apply, or a transition that should occur, and have the toolkit figure everything in between. So we think that's going to be a great addition to a 2.0 headlining item that will make the user interface again just feel a more engaging experience. Then video and audio support. The demonstration earlier where audio was included was patching in a third-party library. There is so much great open source code out there, but we don't really want people to be having to figure out how to make that work. It should be possible just to have the animation and the video drop into your application and run without having to think about anything at all. So those items together should mean that we're able to handle those more complicated aspects of a graphical presentation. Then we're going to look at drag and drop. The applications that have been created so far have managed to work without it through items like tap and place, like in the Solitaire app. Drag and drop would be pretty cool to add there, and it's not a huge amount more, but getting the API right is very difficult when you think it needs to integrate with the operating system, but not just one operating system, but all of them that we need to work through. And if you think about the differences in the way that even desktops implement it, Windows is different to Linux, is different to Mac OS, but then consider how the drag and drop is working on iOS through iPad, and also things like a future potential might be Chromebooks when we're targeting our Android applications further. That's really difficult to do right, and we need to make sure that it's just completely straightforward for people to use. So it's going to take a little while before we're ready to include that functionality. And possibly the coolest for the development environment side of things is that it's about time, we reckon, by then, that we pull together a graphical editor for the user interfaces that you're creating. The playground is a nice addition this release, and it means that we can preview what's being done very, very simply. But what would be more powerful is if it was a drag and drop, what you see is what you get editor affair for creating the application user interfaces for your projects. And so we're going to be looking to include that. It might be plugins to an existing IDE, it might be a standalone application which saves the user interface to a file that is then loaded, or it might be something else. There is a lot of planning still to go into the functionality that we're talking 2 major releases down the road. Should we be adding more? It would be good to get feedback from other folk about what they would like to see coming in sooner, and also where they would like the project to go down the road. 1.2 is pretty much set, we're nearly there, and the 1.3 release, we probably have a lot on our hands. If it relates to text handling and data binding, we should be able to pull it in, but if not, then the 2.0 potential release might be the place for it to be targeting. But let us know what you think, and we'll see what we can pull into the roadmap. And if thinking that far down the road wasn't quite far enough, let's just have a look at what might exist beyond there. Well, when you start to look that far out, it's obviously a little bit difficult to think about specific functionality. So we're talking at a high level what the project is aiming to do. Well, with all of this enabling of great user interfaces that could be built fast, run well, and effectively across so many different devices, we're really going to start looking towards building out applications that make use of that. And so we're hoping to start seeing more comprehensive utilities or productivity applications, a lot more entertainment stuff as well, I think, that we'll be looking forward to seeing. But we would be keen to start showing that the Fyne applications can really contend with other leading software from other sources. And that also leads in to the desktop environment, and following on from the roadmap that Stephen presented in his desktop discussion earlier, we're looking to pull together a complete desktop experience that's fast, attractive, and to do so we'll also need the applications that are expected from regular desktop utilities beyond a calculator through to the types of productivity software that is really conducive to a complete environment. We don't want to reinvent absolutely everything, but we see there's enough software out there that could really do with a significant improvement in the sorts of areas that this toolkit is really aiming to support. And like I said before, we're absolutely looking for other people to feed into where they think this project should go, what they think it could do for them, and that is you, that's everybody listening here. It's everybody that we have spoken to through the different events that we've been holding and through the chat channels that we go around just talking to people about what might be the right way forward for them. And we would just love it if more folk would be providing inspiration or thoughts that would better tie up with what they want in an environment for them. We have a very long list of things that we're going to do and we're excited about it, but it's always better when you know that you're doing what somebody else needs and they are just excited to get it as soon as it's ready. So I hope that has been a helpful look at where the project is going. I know it's been a long day. There's been, I hope, a lot of information. It's been very fun indeed presenting this to you all. I want to say thanks to everybody that has been involved in pulling this event together. Not just the software, the tools, the APIs, and the applications that we've been building that we were showing, but also the material, the technology, all of those things that have made today possible. If you would like to learn more or to get involved, there are a few links here that weren't all present earlier. If you would like to just learn more from a beginner's point of view, or if you're looking to work with the API, we have a tour online at tour.fyne.io, which is a very straightforward introduction to how the Fyne toolkit works, following the model of the Go tour, which you might be familiar with. They did a fantastic job of helping people learn the programming language, and ours simply follows on from there. And the develop documentation that I mentioned before is a great place to go if you want to know more about the architecture, the history of the project, and how it works. If you would be interested in contributing, then thank you so much for even thinking about it. It's really excellent each time somebody new joins the project. We're looking for, obviously, software engineers who can help us with the code, adding the functionality, working out where some of the bugs exist. But not just that, we need people who are excellent at testing, who can file issues and help track down those strange little things that we don't notice when we're building day to day, but we want to make sure don't exist by the time that these releases hit the final version. Documentation is critical. If anybody is excited to be working on that, whether it's as a professional documentation writer or somebody who's learning the toolkit and can see why it's difficult to get started, we'd love to hear from you. People come into the project and say, oh, I'm sorry to be asking a beginner's question. Not at all. If you're asking a question, then maybe there's some missing documentation, and we want to make sure that that's available and easy to find. And also designers. It's been fantastic to have contributions that have helped pull together the logo and the look and feel, and indeed the way that shadows and so forth have worked across the buttons. But more in that area would be helpful. It's a case of having other more opinions and contributions from different angles mean that we're making more well-considered decisions when we pick our design aesthetic. Anybody looking to help in those ways can go to our GitHub project. Everything is up there. We track all of the issues and functionality and milestones in that project. You can find information about how to contribute or what type of things we're looking for. Please do go there, check it out. Let us know if you have any questions. And lastly, we're very lucky to have some really committed core contributors to the project. I mentioned that we have over 30 contributors in total, but the project wouldn't be what it is without 3 or 4 core contributors who to some extent are putting almost all of their time into this right now. And due to the new GitHub Sponsors program, there is now a really easy way that you can show your thanks for their hard work. I've included 3 of those links at the bottom here. There's myself and Stephen, who did the desktop presentation, is Okra Titan. Toaster is another of our core contributors who unfortunately wasn't able to present to us today, but you will have seen his work throughout the presentations. And Steve O'Connor, who was presenting on data and some of the fun and games projects, is also on the project but doesn't currently have his own sponsor page. However, you can sponsor the project as a whole through the last link on that page, and if you would consider it, that would be really amazing. If you've got questions about it, don't hesitate to ask.